Hi, this is William Tincup. We have Matt and Rajiv on today. We're going to be talking about where you work matters. And I've fallen in love with this concept, and they're going to explain more than the concept. They're going to actually explain how they got there. So why don't we do introductions first? I'll go, Matt. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm William. It's great to be with you again, by the way.
Yep,
You probably don't remember this, by the way.
I
But
do.
we first crossed paths probably like 20 plus years ago. I'm president of the Burning Glass Institute. Previously ran a company called Burning Glass, that bought a company called MZ, became a company called Lightcast that people may still know today. But we first met in the halls of HR Tech in McCormick Place,
Yes,
probably like 2005.
Chicago. So much fun. That place. I remember when you were at Burning Glass, and Burning Glass back then did great research. It was like one of the only vendors that actually did actual research. Not marketing research. There's a difference between the marketing research that's different than actual research. But y'all actually did good work back then. It was a good company.
And I think the Lightcast is still doing great work. So the Institute is a fully independent nonprofit research center that's working at the intersection of work and learning and looking at what works in delivering great outcomes for workers and learners, what works in delivering economic mobility, and what builds talent in the workplace.
And all that's changing second by second, I'm assuming.
And the good news is, the bad news is it's changing second by second. The good news is there's a whole lot of data that tells us how it's changing so we can
Right,
respond.
right. And Rajiv?
Great to be on with you, William. So I've had the privilege of getting to work with Matt now for the past 4 or 5 years. I am the managing director of the Schultz Family Foundation, family philanthropy founded by Howard Schultz, the chairman emeritus of Starbucks, and his wife Sherry. Our principal focus is really on expanding economic opportunity for the next generation of Americans, and work that Matt and others had been doing some years ago was starting to show that for many low and mid-skilled Americans, the reason that somebody gets ahead and somebody else doesn't may have less to do with how smart they are and how hard they're working, and maybe a little bit more to do with the practices of their employer. And we at Schultz asked ourselves a question some years ago, which is, if that's true, who are the employers that are doing best at this, and where are the good jobs in all of this? And that led us to this remarkable journey with Matt that began with the American Opportunity Index and now has morphed into Where You Work Matters, which we're thrilled to talk about with you today.
Yeah, and I think this is a HBR article that was talking about a recent article that was talking about entry level jobs. The kind of the eating away of entry level jobs is a leadership problem in the future. And because like, where did we all learn? Where did we learn good leadership and bad leadership? For me, it was a lot of terrible leadership, but I also had some good leaders in there too. And if these kids get out of college or whatever they're going to do, there's just no entry level jobs. That's going to create a gap in the future, which I found fascinating as well. It's like I hadn't even
It,
thought
it's
about that.
it's a huge problem that affects both ends, right? So for students, this is how do you how do you learn how to start your career in the middle? And for employers, this is an existential talent pipeline problem, right? If what we're finding increasingly, and we're seeing this in the data across all sorts of knowledge economy roles, that employers are shifting meaningfully their hiring away from hiring at the entry level and toward hiring mid-career and expert people. If that's the kind of shifts that we're seeing, how do you build expertise when
You can't get a
historically the
job to get
pipeline was
expertise.
you hire people in at the bottom, they do
Yeah,
humble tasks, and
yeah.
eventually they get good. And so this is exactly at the heart of Where You Work Matters, because it says that companies, to Rajiv's point, right? The work, the actions of companies, the practice of companies shapes how effectively they retain workers. It shapes for workers how likely they are to get promoted and move up from within. And those kinds of motions are going to be deeply important in making sure you can actually advance the talent you have and enrich it.
Because not
And
every entry level job is a pathway to gaining greater skills and advancement. You know, some are, many can be, but others are dead ends. And most people have had no idea which ones are the streets that take you somewhere and which ones are the dead ends. And that's precisely one of the key things that Where You Work Matters seeks to illuminate for the American workforce.
I love that. I love that. And again, it's to the point, it's the practices, because everyone's going to say that they do X, Y, and Z, right? Like this is just kind of, we've been through this before. They're going to say that they do it. It's whether or not they actually do it, whether they actually do it. And I want to make sure the audience understands this is an anti-AI type bit. Like businesses should still use AI. This is not that. This is dealing with the human part of business and how do we make sure that the humans that are in business have a trajectory, have a career path, have a learning path, have all of those things so that you can get the most out of them and they can get the most out of their work. So yeah, go ahead.
Just I was going to say, put differently, but same idea, right? When people move up within a firm, they're becoming more valuable to the firm.
Good
And
point.
so, kind of the motions that you develop, the processes that you develop at a firm to help people build currency in themselves are really about making sure that your human capital stock becomes more valuable at the same time.
Yeah. And they also feel better about themselves. So the added benefit of everyone wants to do good work. Everyone wants to be recognized for doing good work, etc. Like everyone wants to be paid for good work. Like so there's another side to that that they want to be seen, they want to be recognized, they want to do good work. No one wants to go into a job and do horrible work. That doesn't work. So all right, so the methodology of how you get about the listing of the companies that do this. Kind of give us some insight without the secret sauce. But give us some insight into how can you recognize this company yes, this company no.
So you said something really important before, William, which is that this is not, there's a lot of things out there that of practices that are out there, and employers can all sort of tick the same boxes.
Right.
And so what we wanted to do was to get beyond stated practice to see how it actually bears out. So rather than coming up with our point of view on what are the practices that move people forward, and then trying to create some kind of inventory, what we do instead is we take a big data approach to being able to say, how do people's careers actually bear out? If two people start in the same role at directly competing firms, how likely are they each to move up? How likely are they each to stay? How does their pay change over time? And so we started with a database of 12 million people of their career histories, actually drawn from a much bigger database. We've got about 65 million, but 12 million people working at almost 1,800 of America's largest companies. And then what we do is we do all the math to sort of categorize what's the role that they're working in, how long have they been there, how to track the movements they've made. And what it allows us to do is to see not what practices is a firm employing, but how do people's careers how do their employees' careers bear out? Which firms are people becoming more valuable? At which people are their workers more likely to become stuck? How much opportunity are they affording to their workforce?
Right. Yeah, I can see that from a college football metaphor. It's the schools that put the most people into the NFL. So if you're a high
Spot
school
on.
recruit, you're looking at schools. Okay, who had the most draft picks last year's draft? Okay, Ohio State. Well, that should definitely be top of the list because they've proven that they know how to create product that then can matriculate into the NFL.
It's an apt analogy as well because when people, sometimes people move up within, but sometimes people move up by moving beyond. And that's a view, by the way, that companies themselves don't really have. We don't really kind of know what happens. Our HR systems aren't designed to tell us what
Right,
happens. Some people,
right.
maybe they tell you you've got an exit survey, but that ability to recognize that, look, you hate to lose somebody. But if they're leaving to step up to something better, it still says that not only have they been better off for making the ride, but you're doing something right in terms of how you're enriching
And,
your
and,
talent.
and there's certain industries where that definitely, I came up through PR and advertising, etc. And to be promoted back then, you had to leave. You actually had to. You could start here as a manager, but to get to a director, to get to a VP, you had to move.
But
Uh,
there's a world of in the white collar professional world, there are a bunch of occupations and industries where that's the case. It's also the case, in other sectors, right? You take the retail sector where you have a lot of people kind of at that floor level, right? And there are not that many opportunities to move into, let's say, a store management role. But which are those retailers that are actually preparing their frontline workforce with the skills, training them in the way so that their next job becomes a better job, even if they're moving elsewhere.
that's right. That's right. It says it's a failure on the you have three relationships as a human being with a company: a candidate, an employee, an alumni. That's it. So we do a decent job-ish on the candidate side. We do a decent-ish job on the employee side. We fail miserably at the employee side. So that not knowing where they go, that's actually on us. There's technology that does all that, that tracks that put content in front of him, and kind of keeps him engaged. Like, hey, listen, you're doing great work, etc. And if done well, you can boomerang back in pretty easily because you've gone out, you've proved yourself, you've done some other things, you've got some pelts on the wall, and it's easier to boomerang back, especially if the brand is kept in touch with you. The one comment though, Matt, that you and I are going to laugh about is I don't believe turnover is a bad thing. Trees in the forest, some of them need to die. Um, I believe it's regrettable turnover. So people that you wanted to keep but didn't have the ability to keep, for whatever reason that is, you wanted to keep Steve or Laura and you couldn't. That a regrettable turnover, I believe, is something that should be more important to HR than just turnover numbers. Because turnover numbers, there's people that should actually leave. We want them to leave. We just don't have the gumption to tell them that we want them to leave.
I'm going to give you the flip side of that too, which is for workers, they deserve some transparency in this too. For some workers, right, they
Point.
aren't looking to stay as long and they're much more focused on growing. And for
Right.
them, a high turnover environment may not be a bad thing. For
Yeah.
others who are looking for stability, they want to understand what is that really, what is turnover like in practice at this company?
Right.
And part of the power of
That's
what we're
interesting.
doing is
Okay.
revealing this to the employee, not just creating useful benchmarks for the HR leadership of a company.
Right. I got that. Matt, you said that 1,800 companies, the largest in the United States. I'm assuming it's the largest ones because smaller ones are they tend to be a little bit less flat. Or
It's actually more kind of where do we have the enough data to be
okay,
able to
okay,
in a rigorously statistical way
right.
say hey, we can actually see a meaningful difference in how these workers are advancing versus others.
I love that.
And by the way, on your point of turnover, I think the broad point here is we all you all should sort of think about where is turnover, where do we want to sort of see turnover from the company, and where do we want to see turnover across roles?
Interesting.
In
Yes.
some ways, right,
Got
it's
it.
particularly as AI reshapes the workforce, introduces yet more dynamism. There's an argument that says that employers really need to rethink their social contract of employment. This is, less about giving you a guarantee of stability, even for people who are looking for stability, and they deserve those kinds of measures, to Rajiv's point. But recognizing that there's no guarantees, but how effective is the firm at being redeploy people? If I'm in a role and I don't need to, you don't need people in that role anymore. That's not a reflection of my work. That's a reflection of changing business environment. Okay, fair enough.
It happens
How
every day.
effectively are you anticipating what those changes are so that you have enough time to redeploy me,
This
to
is
not reskill me, but pre-skill me?
when some of the kind of the tech layoffs started to happen at Alphabet, Meta, and some of these other companies. I would try to tell people that these were bets. So if you're at a roulette table, they bet on metaverse, they push some chips in on metaverse or blockchain or something else, and okay, that bet didn't play out. They let those people go. But if you look at it, Meta let 2,500 engineers go. They're hiring for 4,000 engineers. We don't hear the other side of that that often. They're looking at another bet. Now, to your point, we already have some of the people there. Like why recast? Why you already have them? They were doing one thing. Why not retrain them? Why not refocus them and refocus their efforts on something else?
So let's take that one step further. So then, which companies are the best at doing that? And we posit that companies that have really excelled at building those internal talent pathways,
Oh, I
both
love that.
laterally and vertically, what we kind
Right.
of call mobility muscle,
Yeah.
and those are companies that generally are very highly rated uh, through the Where You Work Matters methodology. Those are places where to this conversation where if you're seeing significant AI impacts in one or two occupational clusters, they're more likely to be able to redeploy that talent elsewhere. But that gets us to, so how do we know this? Let me just continue on very briefly
Sure.
on the methodology front, because what Matt was setting up to say, which I think really makes Where You Work Matters so unique here, is that when we are looking at companies, we start at the occupation level. So we're not comparing the entire workforce, let's say, of Walmart to Microsoft. We compare like versus like occupational groups. So that allows us to much more objectively assess companies across sectors and geographies. Great. But what it really does is it enables us to see how well different workers in different occupations fare within the same company. Because, and I'm going to turn it back over to Matt here, who will say this much more eloquently than I, even at the highest performing companies kind of overall on the Where You Work Matters list, the experience is not uniform. People in some occupations may see much higher mobility than people in others. And this has been a real shortcoming of assessments that just look at how a company does overall. And so when you start to disaggregate this down to the occupation level, you start to see something that's both much more actionable for HR leaders as they're seeking to benchmark vis-a-vis competitors, but much more actionable for actual workers and job seekers.
So one of the things I wanted to ask, and Matt, you'll probably hit on it, is have you seen in the data the difference between high performers or high potentials and kind of the other kind of employee class? I hate to say it's a caste system, but it kind of feels like a caste system because during a recession, I tell this people, and people always hate me when I do it, but during a recession, economic downturn, payroll technology is not cut. Benefits technology is not cut. And anything to do with high potentials is not cut. So there's three things that are kind of sacred on an HR budget in general that don't get cut in the worst of times. So does the data, have y'all thought about kind of, okay, this class of people that are top talent. We have so many different names for them, high potentials, high performers, etc. But have we thought about them and their career trajectories?
This gets to the real heart of the question, which is how consistent are employers in terms of the way they treat their talent. We can't see from the outside in who's a high performer, who's a low performer. What we can see is that they're in both within roles and across roles. There's often wide differences in
Yeah,
employee experience.
yeah,
You can see, hey, some people in this role wind up getting stuck. Some people wind up moving up. How consistent is that? You can also look, we're seeing the same thing across roles in the company. And in some ways, that consistency of worker experience becomes a key measure of employer quality, right? There's some firms out there, take, a firm like Salesforce. They almost all, I think all of the roles that we measured at Salesforce fell between the 79th percentile, comparing the same role to other firms, and the 99th percentile. There's firms like Apple where it literally ranges the entire spectrum from 99th percentile down to single digits. And that tells you something about how consistent are the practices? Is there a
gotcha.
caste system?
Right.
One of the things that we've noticed, because most firms do have wide differences, and on the average firm has about an 80 percentile point difference between their best roles, roles where workers kind of have the best opportunity, and roles where that are kind of more the sand traps, which,
it's,
yeah, I mean, it's enormous.
it's
And
it's the
so,
Grand Canyon. It's so
one of
huge.
the
Yeah.
one of the things we're seeing here, and this gets to your point about like kind of are there golden is there kind of like the golden child and the red
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the redheaded stepchild. What we're seeing here is that a lot of the time this has to do with what are the roles that are central to the firm's strategy. And sometimes this is kind of unexpected, right? So at Whole Foods, for example, their food preparation workers actually do really well, which you wouldn't sort of think about. It's not a role where you tend to
Huh.
think about people doing
Yeah.
really well, but think about where Whole Foods makes all of its margin, right? It's not on the 365
No.
brand toilet
No.
paper.
No. No. No.
It's
No.
it's on the prepared food aisle, and so
That's
it's
right.
really important to them that those workers are they're central to the strategy. Um,
And
you
as
know,
business strategy changes,
yeah,
maybe that changes as well. So as
exactly.
leaders look at their business strategy and say, "Hey, we need to do this shift," it will then reprioritize. But if they've got the practices in place, which is kind of one of the emphasis here, is do they have the practices? Do they even know what the practices are? Do they have the practices? How can they get better at the practices? Maybe be a little bit more agile in their practices because business is going to change, strategy is going to change. So that's constant. So now, how do we make sure that we're giving everyone the fair shot and the best shot at being successful and
Do they
thriving?
have the practices, and do they have the yardsticks for knowing whether for measuring themselves against measuring their
I like
practices
that.
against something, right?
Well,
It's
that's
great to
huge.
have a practice, but does it actually lead to anything?
Well, and to not know, like you might be I mean, again, one of the folks that internal to one of these companies, they might think we're doing a great job. And if you're not looking outside, if there's no benchmark that you're looking against, you might just have that just might be part of your culture. Like, yeah, we're doing a great job at this. And all of a sudden you look at a competitor and you're like, we're doing a horrible job at this. And that's okay. Like if I were a practitioner, I would take that, okay, I'm gonna have a moment of desperation and a little bit depression. And then I'm gonna go, okay, game on. So now do you help mm, do you help them with giving them ideas of best practices that are working for people? Like, is there, how it is, like, it's one of those deals. It's like, are we explaining the problem, describing the problem, giving them data, which is all great because it's all stuff they don't have. But is there a call, or do you feel like there's a way, there's this, or is this for consulting firms? Is this for Deloitte and KPMG and all those guys? Is this for them to kind of come in, swoop in, and help them with their best practices?
So this starts as a diagnostic, but the data set itself has allowed us to really identify who are companies who are doing well, to look at multiple dimensions of performance, right? Not just some overall metric, but who's good at moving people up from within, who's doing well at opening up the front door and taking people through it and up, who's doing well at at retaining their employees and so forth. And what that's allowed us to do is to then sort of focus in on who is at the top on those measures, both overall and role by role, and be able to say, okay, what's different about them? And so it is giving us a battery of best practices to draw from. One of the ones that I think has risen to the top for me from all the best practice that we've seen is really about building a culture of recognition, not just of recognizing people's good talent. Everyone, to your point, does identifies the high performers and low performers.
Right,
But do
right.
you recognize that the people within who are, do you have a way of recognizing people's underlying capability and of being able to look at people not for the job they're doing today, but for the job they could be doing tomorrow?
So some potentiality.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let
Okay.
me build on that because at, in the months since we've released the 2026 Where You Work Matters list, Matt and I have had the opportunity to talk to a goodly number of CHROs whose companies have been rated very highly by Where You Work Matters. And I've asked all of them to really opine on what they think the uh, most effective internal practices
Interesting. All
have
right.
been at their platinum level ratings.
How many of them said compensation?
Interestingly, the one that to a person, and they said it in different ways, but it was just building upon what Matt was saying, this intentionality of
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
yeah. Good
the
call.
understanding that the talent needs that they have for the future and the talent needs they have up here on the org chart can come from people over here on the org chart. But that intentionality with managers down to the actual, worker asking people, what do you want to do next? Where do you see your career taking you? And the thoughtful planning of it, that is not something that is just a one-off thing. That is, the good manager does it, the bad manager does it, but it kind of instilled in the corporate culture, and you start to see it in places like Procter and Gamble or Lockheed Martin. Um, where P&G, a surprising number of their people are come in as interns and then get hired on. They want people at the earliest stage of the career and they want to grow them internally. And so
It's a
it has a
harvesting of
very
talent.
distinct
Yeah.
culture compared to a lot of other places, and so it just kind of was one that really stood out to me.
So our fathers probably, when they had jobs, their businesses, the companies that they work for, the companies manage their career. And through the years, there's been this tussle of who manages the career. Does the employee manage their career? Like, what's their responsibility of managing their career? And what's the company's responsibility in managing their career and helping them manage their career? And I know it's a hard question in terms of like how do you get that right, but there is responsibility at the employee level. They giving them data and all that stuff, but giving it can't just be the company saying, okay, you're here, let's get you to here. Uh,
I think you're hitting on something really important, which is that both employer and employee need to have agency. You need to set up structures for both of them to do that. I think what happens too often is that this winds up one or the other. Often it's we have very casual work relationships in America. Employers hire and fire at will, employees respond. I think the Great Resignation was just an expression of that in a seller's market. But what that often means is that the responsibility for career planning, and for knowing what kind of skills to acquire next, what credentials I might need, where to go next, is often sort of just left with the employee to manage. Look, think about even all the sort of the learning platforms that are out there. And they often have really good content. There are good resources that companies are making available, but often without the signals that say, hey,
Do it.
Matt, we
Yeah.
want you to earn more money. Here's what you need to do. So you kind of need
Yeah.
both sides. We don't want this to be, okay, Matt, you have no choice. You're on a track. The treadmill only moves this way. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that that we're actually connecting our talent development to our corporate development
Well,
strategies.
you get what you incentivize, right? You could almost say that's a truism in life, especially in business. One of the failures of LMSs since the beginning of LMSs in general has been it's a repository for content, but unless the company, outside of compliance stuff, content, unless the company says you have the time and we want you to achieve, and here are the things when you achieve those levels or those courses or whatever the bit is, here's what's at the end of that for you. So again, kind of looking at learning, and a lot of the LMSs, it's really kind of quite fascinating because they've all shifted to what we saw 20 years ago in competency models, but now to skills models. So it's breaking things down into these micro skills and how do we get skills development and how do we do it, which I love the conversation. The failure of competency models years ago was that you had to go all in with the competency model that you built. You had to hire to it, you had to promote through it, you had to fire through it. And so your competency model was only as good as your adherence to the model. Skills are the same thing. They're just kind of
People are making that
uh,
same mistake.
that's right. That's what I'm afraid of.
They're saying basically unless you go all in, and the reality is look, there's some jobs, if you were to sort of think about the universe of jobs within a company, right? There's some jobs that are so core to your strategy that you actually don't need a skill architecture for them, because
Right.
like, if you're Pfizer and you've got some compounds, some GLP-1 or whatever that
Yeah,
like kind of the scientists who create those, like, where they come from. We are not going to reskill people into those jobs.
that's
There's
right.
another set of jobs which are not going to distinguish you as an employer. It may be heretical to say this, but kind of there's probably about 10 or 15% of roles where you're having really top skilled people and ensuring that they're continuing to are really going to drive your success. This gets back to your point about intentionality, right? Intentionality isn't just about saying, okay, how do we do well overall? Intentionality is about being intentional about saying what we are going to be good at and what we're not. Nobody can be good at everything. Of our 1,750 companies that we rated, I think there were only 22, Rajiv, keep me honest on that number, who scored what we call platinum across all of the categories looked at. 22 out of almost 1,800, right?
Yeah.
So, what that says is employers have to make choices. Are you intentional about which choices you're making?
I love that.
Sometimes that intentionality isn't always uh, either obvious or doesn't fit the accepted pattern. So let's take another example. You know, most large companies employ financial analysts in their finance division.
Lots of them.
But of
Yeah.
course, there's a preponderance of them in the banks and financial services sector on Wall Street. And if you're a young person looking for, a first job in the world of financial analysis, The prevailing wisdom might be, well, look to Wall Street, look to some of the big banks because those are roles that are central to their business, and of course they will, you'll be paid and treated well. But what we find is of the hundreds of firms that uh, employ financial analysts that we assess, something like, and again, Matt, you'll have to keep me honest here. I think it's something like 27 of them, only 27 we assess to be great at the at the early career level, at the growth stage, and for stability across all of our three key archetypes. So, of those 27, like, wouldn't all of them be in the financial services sector? No, sir. Only 6 of them are in the banks and financial services sector. But, they're also General Mills, Liberty Mutual, Nike. So you have companies outside the sector where, for whatever reason, they have found a way that that particular occupation is a great occupation for people across the breadth of their career. So I think there's both, yes, that intentionality point, but there are a lot of unexpected places to thrive. We recently on the Where You Work Matters site released a kind of occupation finder tool that literally enables anybody to type in an occupation and to think about the members of the class of 2026. Show me the kind of best employers that offer early career opportunities for accountants, and we show the companies that are best rated, but also hiring the most. And the when you look at this in aggregate, as people kind of bemoan the state of the labor market out there, well, just among the 1,750 companies we look at for young people, there's something like 6,000 occupations across those employers that are both highly rated and where those companies have been hiring entry level talent at average or above average levels over the past 6 months. So opportunity is there. You just have to know where to look. And that's what makes this kind of a critical data set for the moment we're in.
For the candidates, wayfinding in a way where they're flying blind, they're looking at data from other different types of places. This is objective data, and it's looking at, okay, what those positions are and who's hiring, and so who's good at something, but also who's hiring. From a candidate perspective, that's going to be, I could just see that as a great tool for them to have in their arsenal to be able to understand, again, where work matters for them, and defining that for them. It's they can then start to take a little bit more ownership of, okay, I don't have to just take the job. I can kind of discover the job or the company that does this well. And I love that. So the website is whereyouworkmatters.com, right?
.org.
.org.
Whereyouworkmatters.org.
.org. Okay. So I'm assuming this is an annual survey. So we have 26 that just came out.
Yes.
It's going to be, so 27, et cetera, which is kind of, and then we'll have more benchmarks and more data. Probably, hopefully, more companies will opt in, et cetera. So will you expand the data set that you already have?
We keep expanding it significantly. So
Got
this
it.
year, as we
Got it.
move to the Where You Work Matters, we went from was about 400 employers to 1,750,
Right.
but also increasingly creating those breakouts role by role, as Rajiv was describing, because that's that's where the action is. We
Yeah.
talk a lot about good employers, we talk about good jobs. But there's the nexus between them, which is where opportunity is for candidates, and that's where the granularity is for employers to be able to benchmark how they're doing and to figure out where they need to lean in.
I love it. I love it. Guys, any final thoughts or remarks? I personally love what you're doing because I see the value for everybody involved. So society, regional economics, like I can see this kind of proliferating into the the Schultz Foundation and the work that y'all want to do there, but also just helping companies, having a baseline, having some benchmark, having something to look at against so that they can get better. And for
Yeah,
candidates, a way to find these things. Go ahead. Sorry, Rich.
exactly. No, we believe this level of transparency based on a real empirical, objective analysis of worker outcomes, not based on what companies say they're doing, but what's really happening,
Yeah,
adds value to both sides of the marketplace. It provides, a really objective benchmark and insight to companies. Companies have lots of internal data. They have other benchmarks that they use, but this is a fundamental addition to everything they've got. And then to everything we've been talking about here over the last half hour, opportunity is not obvious out there,
yeah.
and this is a real wayfinder for workers to identify down to the role level where that is, and ultimately, right, this will create a more efficient marketplace, and fundamentally, it's good for business, it's good for workers. Two things can be true, and I think that is the story behind Where You Work Matters.
It's 100 years ago, I owned an ad agency, and I think there was like 3 or 4 years in a row we won best places to work in Fort Worth, Dallas. And the bit is, if you've ever done those things, it's an award that you can game. If you understand the game, you can game it, right? Fortune, their list, great places to work, their list, you can game those things. This can't be this can't be gamed because you're not getting data from them. You're not getting survey data and things like that from the companies or from the employees, like Glassdoor or something like that. You're actually looking at the outcomes, and those can't be gamed or as
Put
easy.
differently,
Yeah,
you can't fake it. You can game it. You can game it in the sense that, look, you can lean in and we know the measures are very transparent. There are measures of how fast people advance. There are measures of how well people get paid relative to their peers. The measures of retention. Look, just like with kind of the safety ratings on cars have gotten safer because those ratings have been there, and we hope that having the benchmarks available, having that yardstick, will enable companies to get more effective over time.
every CHRO, every candidate, all the jobs, all the career services, they all need to know about this. Like literally, they need to know about this because it'll help them. It's truly helpful. So y'all are doing God's work. Appreciate you.